We are witnessing the emergence of a technology that threatens to fundamentally restructure the relationship between individual autonomy and state power. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, represent far more than a monetary evolution. They constitute what may be the most comprehensive surveillance apparatus ever contemplated by democratic governments and transform every financial transaction into a public, permanent record accessible to state authorities. So, today, we're going to examine CBDCs through a deontological lens, or an ethical framework that evaluates actions based on adherence to fundamental moral principles rather than just the consequences. Now, this approach, developed primarily by Immanuel Kant, holds that certain rights and duties are inviolable, regardless of practical benefits gained by violating them. CBDCs, as currently conceived, represent a categorical violation of privacy rights enshrined in foundational democratic documents, most notably the Fourth Amendment. Now, before you guys think that I'm blowing this out of proportion, I'm going to insert a clip of people talking about citizens' right to privacy and how we simply don't care.
I mean, I'm probably the wrong person to, but you say Europeans are concerned about privacy. They're not. They're all on Instagram. They're all on Facebook. If you say to people, "Oh, are you concerned about privacy?" Of course they say yes. And then if you say to them, "Can I have your Facebook login for a can of Coke?" they'll give it to you. So what people say and what they do, I think, are very different. We have to make the privacy. You can't rely on people to do this. We have to create the infrastructure for that.
The argument that citizens have surrendered privacy expectations through social media engagement fundamentally misunderstands the distinction between consensual disclosure and state compulsion. So, let's back up a little bit. The Fourth Amendment establishes that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. While the framers could not have anticipated that our most revealing papers and effects would be financial transaction records, this data represents perhaps the most intimate form of personal information in modern society. Consider what your transaction history reveals: political affiliations through donations, health conditions through medical payments, relationships through shared experiences, movement through location-based purchases, beliefs through book purchases, and struggles through therapy payments. This creates a financial fingerprint of human consciousness, a detailed map of how you move through the world, and essentially who you are. From a Kantian perspective, privacy is a necessary precondition for human dignity. Kant's categorical imperative holds that we must act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never merely as a means. When governments systematically monitor their citizens' financial lives, they treat those citizens as political threats, requiring surveillance rather than autonomous moral agents, deserving respect. Now, this principle, of course, extends beyond American constitutional law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the European Charter of Fundamental Rights also enshrine privacy as inviolable. The deontological position holds that these rights exist independently of consequences, that we must protect privacy, not because it sometimes leads to good outcomes, but because respecting privacy is inherent to respecting human dignity. Now, CBDCs fundamentally differ from existing payment systems. Physical cash transactions really only exist in the moment between the parties, and credit card transactions create records maintained by private companies that might be subject to legal protections and restrictions. But CBDCs create direct, permanent, searchable records between every citizen and the central bank. Every transaction, regardless of size or significance, becomes part of a comprehensive government database. And this represents what Michael Foucault would recognize as the ultimate panopticon, a system where the possibility of constant observation fundamentally alters behavior, even when no one is actively watching. Unlike cash or even credit cards, which exist independently of centralized systems, digital currencies can be programmed with restrictions, expiration dates, geographical limitations, or spending categories. The state gains power not only to observe economic activity, but to directly manipulate and control it. China's digital yuan demonstrates how these mechanisms operate in practice. Their digital currency creates what authorities call controllable anonymity, a contradiction in terms. While including privacy thresholds for small transactions, all user and transaction data remains accessible to government authorities through centralized databases. The system's programmability enables unprecedented control. Digital yuan can be programmed with spending restrictions and even expiration dates. Pilot programs have distributed currency that could only be spent on specific services, demonstrating the technology's capacity for behavioral channeling. Now, this programmable control is historically unprecedented. Maybe during war times, countries would issue rations or specific paper money that could only be used for specific things. But this is fundamentally different. Authorities can freeze, restrict, or direct spending in specific contexts, impossible with cash or traditional payments. Citizens cannot simply spend money elsewhere. The money itself can be programmed to reject transactions. So, let's ask ourselves. Kant's categorical imperative requires that we act only according to principles that we could will to be universal laws. So, could we universalize the principle that governments should have complete access to citizens' financial records? Well, the answer reveals the moral problem immediately. A world where all governments, or the majority of them, possess comprehensive financial surveillance capabilities is one where human autonomy becomes impossible. People cannot engage in anything political dissent, religious practice, or even personal relationships without the state knowledge and potential interference. Now, this creates behavior modification that occurs when people know that they are being watched. From a deontological perspective, this constitutes a violation of human dignity, regardless of whether surveillance is being used benevolently. Now, authentic choice requires a sphere of privacy within which individuals can deliberate and express themselves without external observation. But are there any good things about CBDCs? Well, the most common defense of CBDCs against privacy objections is the revealed preference argument that if people voluntarily share information on social media, then they must not value privacy at all, making surveillance concerns hypocritical. Now, like I said before, This argument fundamentally misunderstands the moral distinction between voluntary disclosure and compulsory surveillance. Social media users retain agency over what to share, with who they share it, and under what circumstances. And mind you, they can delete posts, change settings, abandon platforms altogether, and choose not to participate at all. So, CBDCs eliminate this choice. If implemented as cash replacements, they create a coercive monopoly, a system where participation becomes necessary for economic survival. And we all know that economic survival is literally just the ability to survive. Now, citizens can't opt out of surveillance without opting out of economic participation entirely. And unless we're all going to go back to farming and growing our own food, that's not going to be feasible for everybody. Moreover, CBDC surveillance far extends social media tracking in scope and practice. Social platforms track specific behaviors within their ecosystems, but CBDCs would track every economic decision throughout a lifetime. The data would be permanent, comprehensive, and directly accessible to government authorities. And the philosophical point is crucial here. Consent under conditions of systemic compulsion is not consent. When alternatives are eliminated and participation becomes necessary for social functioning, the language of voluntary participation becomes essentially meaningless. Now, proponents offer the utilitarian justifications that comprehensive financial surveillance would eliminate money laundering, prevent terrorist financing, reduce tax evasion, and combat crime. And these are serious concerns deserving consideration. However, from a deontological perspective, the utilitarian benefits cannot justify systematic violation of everybody's fundamental rights. History provides numerous examples of surveillance systems that were implemented with benevolent intentions, but later evolved into oppression instruments. Edward Snowden's revelations demonstrated how programs ostensibly designed to prevent terrorism extended far beyond the original scope, ultimately encompassing ordinary citizens' communications with no criminal connection. So the pattern is consistent. Surveillance capabilities, once created, tend to expand beyond the original scope. Now, powers granted for exceptional circumstances become normalized for everyday use. This is not a system bug, but an inevitable feature of institutional power. And from a rights based perspective, the burden of proof falls on those who would eliminate privacy, not those who are trying to preserve it. So the question is not whether surveillance might catch bad actors, because it would. But instead, the question is whether we can construct a free society on universal surveillance foundations. Now, some propose privacy preserving CBDCs that use complex cryptographic systems, allowing authorities to track illegal activities while keeping lawful transactions private. And while demonstrating privacy awareness, these approaches face fundamental limitations. Any system allowing government access to transaction data creates a single point of failure for privacy protection. Privacy cannot be retrofitted into surveillance systems. CBDC architecture requires centralized ledgers accessible to authorities, and privacy protections become additional layers that are vulnerable to policy changes or technological circumvention. And of course, dystopian literature provides very crucial insights into surveillance evolution. In George Orwell's 1984, it demonstrates that totalitarian control doesn't come through dramatic coercion, but gradual elimination of private spaces. And Dave Eggers' The Circle illustrates how surveillance systems emerge through convenience and social pressure rather than force. These works reveal a pattern. Surveillance systems rarely announce themselves as oppressive tools. They emerge as solutions to genuine problems and responses to popular demands. But the threat to freedom comes from gradual habituation to observation and control. So, we face a crucial decision point. Choices about CBDCs will establish precedents shaping the relationship between individual autonomy and state power for generations. These are not merely political questions, but constitutional questions about the fundamental structure of free societies. The framers of the Constitution understood that liberty's greatest threats often come from gradual rights erosions occurring one seemingly reasonable step at a time. So, they crafted constitutional protections precisely to prevent well intentioned policies from undermining freedom's foundations. And CBDCs represent exactly the kind of incremental threat to liberty that constitutional protections were designed to prevent. So the challenge is not resisting all monetary innovation, but ensuring that such innovations strengthen rather than undermine the conditions necessary for human flourishing. From a deontological perspective, financial privacy is not hiding criminal activity, but preserving space within which authentic human choice and development can occur. And in choosing how to implement monetary systems in the future, we choose what kind of people we want to become and what kind of society we want to bequeath to the future generations. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you have any thoughts or comments, be sure to leave them down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, I will see y'all next time.